In today's episode, reviewing the Spurs' last 4 games against the Orlando Magic, Denver Nuggets, Cleveland Cavaliers, and Portland Trailblazers. Where the Spurs stand in the lottery order. An interesting quote from Chris Paul regarding the Spurs heading into next season. Previewing the last 4 games for the Spurs in their 24-25 regular season schedule. How's it going, everyone? It's been about a week since I last recorded an episode of the Spot Up Pod. I do want to note that the notes I'm using today were prepped as of 6 p.m. Central Time on Monday evening. So if there's some games that took place on Monday evening, that's why I didn't talk about them. For the other NBA teams, the Spurs were off on Monday. So let's go ahead and go into the last this past week for the Spurs, how they played in this last week. And it was a tough schedule, again, that they had in front of them, considering that, again, they are without De'Aaron Fox. They are still without Victor Wembanyama to close out the season. So let's go back to last Tuesday. The Spurs are at home hosting the Orlando Magic. The Magic were favored in this game by 4.5 points. The Spurs were without Jeremy Sohan for this one. It was basically close throughout. The Spurs led by 11 points late in the third quarter, but in the fourth, the Magic really turned up their defense. They made scoring tough for San Antonio. And then the Spurs on their defensive end had trouble stopping Paolo Banchero and Kentavious Caldwell-Pope down the stretch. The Spurs did get it to crunch time barely for a few moments, but then the Magic kind of pushed their lead right back up, and they ended up winning. Orlando did by 11 points in this game. Playing against a top 10 defense in Orlando, the Spurs had a very difficult time taking care of the basketball. Turnovers were a big issue for them. Harrison Barnes has a good game here, leading the Spurs to 24 points. Julian Champagnie has a strong game off the bench with 19 points. Stephon Castle finishes with 16 points, but he did turn the ball over a new career high 7 times in this game. But so on offense, yes, Castle did struggle a little bit in this game. But then on the defensive end, he had really good defense on Franz Wagner. Franz, finished with 24 points, yes, but he's finished shooting 9 of 20 from the floor. He really struggled, from his 3-ball. A lot of times Castle, cut off his driving lanes, and he had to pass out to somebody else in the offense. So Castle did a pretty good job on Franz. Even when asked after the game about, how he did in that matchup, Castle himself said, he thought he did it pretty good whenever it was a one-on-one situation against Franz Wagner. Devin Vassell and Keldon Johnson did struggle on the offensive end for the Spurs. And then the Magic, who aren't known for their three-point shooting, ended up making 18 threes in this game. That was one of the big issues for the Spurs on defense. KCP, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, makes 7 for Orlando. And then Caleb Houston off the bench makes 4 threes for the Magic. And then, I already mentioned Franz there. So the Spurs did lose last Tuesday in a closer game against the Magic. Then on Wednesday, the Spurs are on the road, a second out of back-to-back, traveling to Denver. And this one was more about, the players that were in this game rather than, what it should have been on paper. So the Nuggets as well played the previous night. So it was a second out of back-to-back for them where they had actually gone to overtime. So what happened here was that the Nuggets actually sat out their entire starting 5 for this game. So none of their starting 5 played. For the Spurs, they were missing Devin Vassell, they were missing Keldon Johnson, and they were missing Jeremy Sohan. So both teams had very different lineups than they're used to. However, the Nuggets were still favored by 2 points. I will say. So the Denver had a very small lead in terms of being favorites. The Spurs actually came out pretty well. They led by 20 points early. The Nuggets, behind Russell Westbrook, did fight back and basically lead by as many as 5 points in the fourth quarter. However, the Spurs relied on veterans Chris Paul and Harrison Barnes to kind of close out the game down the stretch, and the Spurs ended up winning there in crunch time, and they ended up winning by 7 points. Barnes had another strong game with 20 points. Chris Paul ends up with 17 points. Mamu got more minutes than usual and ends up with 16 points and 10 rebounds. Blake Wesley had a good night on the offensive end with 15 points, including making 3 threes in this game. And then Castle almost got his first triple-double of his career, finishing with 15 points, a career-high 15 rebounds, and then 9 assists to just 1 turnover. And I want to note that 1 turnover because, like I said in the previous game on Tuesday, Castle had turned the ball over a career-high 7 times. Well, he does a better job of kind of figuring that issue out against Denver, and only turns the ball over 1 time while getting 9 assists. So again, Castle was 1 stat short of a triple-double. Russell Westbrook, like I mentioned, was the go-to player for Denver. He had 30 points in the night, but he really struggled in the fourth quarter. The Spurs did a great job defensively on him, and he really struggled in Denver basically without Russ getting going. Couldn't get going in the fourth, and so they ended up losing that game. So again, the rebounds are notable for Castle because it's kind of one of the areas the last 4 games, at least in April, that he's really been putting up some stats on the glass, so really attacking the glass with the boards that are available for the Spurs. Then on Friday, the Spurs are back home. They are hosting the number one team out east, the Cleveland Cavaliers. The Cavs, of course, were favored by 13. They pretty much had all of their core players available. The Spurs were without Jeremy Sohan. The Cavs came out really early, and it looked like it was going to be another blowout where the Spurs were down by 23 points in the first half. But San Antonio did fight back. They got the game down at crunch time, and basically the Spurs had a chance to either tie or win the game. So it comes down to the final possession on offense for the Spurs. 4.6 seconds left. They inbound the ball to Harrison Barnes, who's posting up DeAndre Hunter. Barnes kind of goes to his right shoulder, gets past Hunter, but then who was it? Max Strus comes in to kind of contest his layup attempt. So Barnes has to go to like a floater, like a floating hook, and basically that shot hits the back of the rim and falls out. And so the Cavs end up holding on by just 2 points against the Spurs. The Spurs basically designed that play to go to Barnes to kind of see what he could do against Hunter there. And so the players, the coach Johnson, they all kind of were okay with those results, even though the shot didn't go in for Barnes. But Barnes was key for the Spurs making this comeback. He ends up scoring 23 points on the night to lead the Spurs, including 12 of his points there in the fourth quarter. He made 2 crucial corner threes to kind of continue to chip at the Cavs' lead and get the Spurs in that position. Stephon Castle was again 1 stat away from his first triple-double. He ends up on this night with 22 points, 9 rebounds, and 11 assists. After the game, he actually said he thought that he would have had a triple-double. It was just like, I guess he thought maybe like someone at the stat sheet didn't, I guess record something right, but he didn't get the triple-double there. He ends up, though, being very aggressive against the Cavs' defense, even on possessions when he had notable defenders switching onto him, such as Evan Mobley. He still kind of attacked the rim relentlessly. He ends up with 12 paint points on this night. And then anytime he could get Sam Merrill on a switch, he immediately attacked Sam Merrill. Just kind of the Spurs almost were like hunting Merrill at different times for different players to kind of attack him on the defensive end. Julian Champagnie has a good night, scoring 15 points off the bench. And then for Cleveland, it was Donovan Mitchell leading the way with 26 points. Mobley played in his first game against the Spurs and ends up with 25 points, 12 boards, and I think 3 blocks. He was a problem both outside early and then inside in the second half. Darius Garland had a tough shooting night, but he still ended up with 19 points, got going there in the second half. And then DeAndre Hunter had a good shooting game off the bench with 18 points for Cleveland. And then, this is how much the Cavs thought they were going to win the game. Basically, Jarrett Allen started the first half, but then he didn't even come back in the second half. The Cavs were up by 17, give them credit. They were up by 17. So it looked like, this game was in hand, but then the Spurs did fight back and make it a ball game. And they almost lost, Cleveland did, without Allen playing there in the second half. And then just some notable quotes that came out of that game was that Chris Paul was basically asked about his future, basically, is he going to continue to play basketball after the season, considering that he's going to be turning 40 in May? And Paul basically said he has to evaluate that decision after the season ends with his family about whether or not he's going to continue playing. Harrison Barnes was asked if he would like the Spurs to kind of bring Chris Paul back to the Spurs since he's going to be a free agent. Paul will be. And Barnes basically said yes, like he's all for the Spurs re-signing Chris Paul if Paul continues to play in the NBA. So again, that was just Barnes giving his input on wanting to have CP3 back as a teammate. Then the Spurs' final game of the week came on Sunday, their most recent loss. So they were on the road at Portland. The Blazers were sitting, I think, 8 players in this game from their rotation. They were still favored by 4, Portland was. And so, the Blazers basically led by double digits for most of this game. They led by 17 points multiple times. The Spurs, though, did force crunch time. They got it to basically 2 points twice in those final 5 minutes. However, almost like Duke the other night in the Final Four, the Spurs had trouble against Portland's ball pressure. The Blazers did a good job of forcing some full court defensive possessions, and the Spurs had trouble inbounding the ball. They basically throw it away to a Blazers player, and then that player would just take it up for a layup. And so basically, they had some crucial mistakes there in the crunch time. The Spurs inbounding the ball. Portland basically gets their lead up, and they end up winning by 11 points there at the end of the fourth quarter. Castle has another strong game with 22 points, 12 in the fourth quarter to help lead the Spurs. He had a good scoring game inside. He did struggle from outside with his jump shot. I think it was 1 of 5 from 3. And that's kind of something that Sean Elliott kind of mentioned on the broadcast is that, he's seeing that a lot of times Castle just kind of catches the ball, even if he's 2 or 3 feet behind the 3-point line, and he just kind of takes a shot because obviously defenses are leaving him open. And a lot of times he's missing that. So what Elliott was saying in the commentary was he should maybe move a step or 2 inside to get closer to that 3-point line, which is 24 feet, and take it from there instead of taking those 26, 27-foot threes, which again, lately as well as Castle's been playing, finishing at the rim, His three ball has really been struggling here in these last few games, to end the season. So again, that was just something interesting that Sean Elliott mentioned. Castle still continued to attack the glass, like I mentioned, he's been doing with 7 rebounds. And then basically he had an interesting quote where he basically was asked about, the Rookie of the Year race. He basically says, he's very confident saying that he thinks he has this award locked up, that he's going to win it. And he's basically not, he's saying that just based on his play, the fact that he's very confident in how he's playing right now. That the Spurs are letting him play his game out there, and that he's very confident saying that he thinks he is the Rookie of the Year at this point with the week to go in the season. Obviously Vegas agrees with Castle. They have him as the favorite right now in the odds to win the Rookie of the Year. Behind him though is Zachary Risache from the Atlanta Hawks, and of course Hawks fans that post. That tweeted, should I say? I put that quote from Castle on Twitter, and it got going. And so obviously some Hawks fans were not very happy with that comment. And it is just interesting when you look at the Rookie of the Month race between Castle and Risache. They are the only 2 rookies this season who have been candidates in all 5 months of the season for Rookie of the Month in their respective conferences. And then both players are the only 2 rookies who have at least won that award twice. But again, Vegas says that Castle is going to is getting close to winning that award here. He's the favorite going into the final week of the season. And again, just what I talked about earlier, the fact that he's almost putting up triple doubles as a rookie. There was some stat where he's averaging like 15, 5, and 5 in the last 4 games. And only players like Victor and Luka Doncic did that as rookies. That was coming from one of the from Spurs PR man, Jordan Howenstein. And then also, what else was I going to say? Yeah, and then also, it's not just about the offensive end for Castle; it's also his defense. What did I mention earlier? How he really locked up Franz Wagner, a very notable offensive player driving the ball. He was one of the primary defenders on Wagner in that game. So it's not just about the offensive stats for Castle. It's also his defense and how the Spurs have put him on wings, on bigs, not on bigs. Well, he can switch on bigs at times, on wings, on smaller guards, and different players like that. So again, right now it does definitely look like Castle's going to win that Rookie of the Year. And so he did make those comments. Let's see here. Devin Vassell ends up with 21 points for the Spurs on a good shooting night with 7 rebounds. However, he did have just 2 points there in the fourth quarter on 1-of-1 shooting. So again, he was obviously 100% in the fourth, but it looks like either they're not looking for him. He's just not as aggressive there in the fourth quarter. And that happened in one of the other games. I don't know if I mentioned it. Where was it? Vassell. I don't remember what other game it was. But again, it was more like another one of those quiet nights. Oh yeah, it was a game against Cleveland where he ends up with 24 points. Vassell had against Cleveland, but then 21 of those 24 were scored in the first 3 quarters. And so again, he kind of went quiet there against the Cavs and then also against the Blazers. But again, he had a good shooting night like he's been doing post All-Star break for most of this time. Let's see here. Malachi Branham had an impactful game. So early on, the Spurs were struggling against the Blazers. Coach Johnson immediately calls timeout and brings in both Malachi Branham and Jordan McLaughlin. Malachi gets a few buckets to go, and he ends up having a good scoring night. Ends up with 17 points off the bench. And while he's known for his mid-range jumper, sometimes his 3-ball can be here and there. What was really interesting is how crafty he's been on his drives, whether finishing with the left hand or the right hand. And I think what's happening here is that maybe a lot of times, maybe because of how far down he is on the roster in terms of the depth chart, a lot of teams aren't prepared for him, for scouting him and being ready to guard a player like Branham, who doesn't really get out there a lot. And so I think he's kind of catching some defenses by surprise, but I mean, it's definitely something that I've noticed is how much he's being more aggressive and not just settling for jumpers at times, and being really crafty in the pick and roll or on his drives and putting the ball down on the floor and kind of driving in and kind of getting all the way to the closest point of the rim to finish with some of these crafty layups. So that's notable there from Malachi Branham. Harrison Barnes has 17 points in the night, and like Castle, he helped out really well in the fourth quarter, ends up with 10 of his 17 points in the fourth. Keldon Johnson did struggle in this one with 2 points on 1 of 11 shooting. A lot of times he was kind of forcing layups and hooks against 2 or 3 defenders inside the paint. And then for Portland, Tumani Kamara, who's one of the better wing defenders in the league, ends up with 23 points. Shaden Sharp took a lot of shots to get 21 points. Delano Banton also took a lot of shots to get 20 points, but someone who was really impactful for Portland was Chris Murray off the bench with 18 points. So the Blazers ended up getting that win against the Spurs. And so my prediction last week was that the Spurs were going to go 0-4. They did a little bit better than that because of the situation in Denver, where the Nuggets basically sat out their entire starting lineup. And so the Spurs went 1-3. Vegas agreed with me. They thought that the Spurs would go 0-4, but the Spurs defied that and went 1-3. All right, so for the main topic of this episode, what I really want to do is talk about where the Spurs stand in the lottery order. So on Sunday, going into that game against the Portland Trailblazers for the Spurs, both the Spurs and Blazers were in a situation where we know they probably weren't going to make the play-in tournament, but mathematically there was still a chance. Well, the Sacramento Kings didn't let them even have their shot. So the Kings were 10th on Sunday, and basically if the Kings won, they would eliminate both the Spurs and the Blazers from staying kind of mathematically in the play-in race. And so the Kings did win against the Cavaliers of all teams. They're right in the fourth quarter of Spurs Blazers, and so that officially eliminated both the Spurs and Blazers from play-in contention. Again, we didn't think that the Spurs were going to get into the play-in after Wemby and Fox were ruled out for the rest of the season, but still, mathematically it was still a chance. So anyway, the Spurs can no longer get into the play-in picture out west for the season. So their streak of not making the playoffs continues to go on after a few years now. So where are they right now? Through 78 games, they are 32-46 on the season. They have 4 games left that I'll talk about a little bit later. What I really want to focus on, though, is looking at where they're most likely going to end up in the going into the draft lottery, should I say. So right now there is technically still a very, very slim chance that they can tie the Toronto Raptors for 7th in the lottery order, where the Spurs currently sit 8th. But I mean, a lot of factors have to go into play here, and these are really tough factors. One, the Raptors are at 29-50. So again, the Spurs can still get to 50 losses. But here's how: the Spurs would have to go 0-4 in their last 4 games this coming week. Meanwhile, the Raptors would have to play perfect basketball and win their next 3 games. And so, again, you're really relying on a lot of factors here. The minute the Raptors lose a game, it's over. They get to hold on to 7th. And the minute the Spurs win a game, that's it. It's over. They're going to stay most likely at 8th. And what's going to be interesting is that what happens if, like, this week the Spurs lose their first 3 games and then the Raptors win their first 2 games, and then all of a sudden Sunday when they play in the regular season finale of the season for both teams, what if it comes down to that? Like, that 7th position could be up for grabs if again if both teams go with this route where the Spurs are 0-3 going into Sunday and then the Raptors are 2-0. It'd just be an interesting season finale to see, I think, who would tank the most here in this game to see who wins that game. But anyway, most likely odds are that the Spurs are going to end up 8th going into the lottery order. They have a pretty clear distance from the Portland Trailblazers. They're about 3.5 games away from Portland, who are 9th. So again, Portland's probably not going to catch them unless the Spurs win all their games to end the season. Let's see here. So if they are 8th, here are some of the odds and kind of some of the past results that I want to review here. So if they're 8th, the Spurs going into the lottery order in later in this month, they would have a 26.3% chance at landing a top 4 pick. If they're 8th going into the lottery order, they would have a 6% chance of landing the number 1 overall pick, which would likely be Cooper Flagg. So their odds, according to Tankathon, is that their best odds are likely to be 8th with the 34.5% odds at 8th, and then if not, fall to 9th at 32.1%. Again, those are quoted Tankathon.com. So what I want to do here is look at the last six lotteries going into the lottery, should I say, the results, and look at, because this is when the 8th pick had a 6% chance at number 1. So again, I want to see, how often did the team move up in the lottery, or did they kind of stay or fall behind? And so in the last 6 drafts, basically, they stayed 8th or worse, fell basically to 9th or 10th in 67% of the drafts, which is 4 out of 6 drafts. So again, that's the most likely outcome. However, there can be a good luck outcome. Maybe you get lucky in this kind of outcome, and that is in 2 of the last 6 drafts. That's 33%. The team that was going in 8th into the lottery ended up jumping up to 2nd and 3rd. So let me talk about these results and who these players were that ended up getting drafted. So let's go to first. Let's go to last year's draft. So or last year's lottery. So 2024, the Utah Jazz are going in as the 8th place. They end up falling to 10th, and then they end up selecting Cody Williams. Okay, so the Jazz fell. 2023, the Wizards go in as 8th. They end up landing 8th, and they end up drafting Jarris Walker, who ends up getting traded to the Indiana Pacers. So again, Wizards stay 8th and 8th. Again, not really improving here. 2022, the Lakers go in 8th. They land at 8th, but their pick was already going to the New Orleans Pelicans. That turns into Dyson Daniels. So again, the Lakers didn't improve here. Or the Pelicans, we should say. 2021, the Chicago Bulls go into the lottery at 8th. They end up getting 8th in the lottery, and that turns into Franz Wagner, who ends up, that pick basically was supposed to go to the Magic. So Magic obviously end up with Franz Wagner. So again, in these last 4 years, should I say, it's never been any better. It's always either been 8th or worse, with the team slipping to 10th. However, the first 2 years that they implemented these new rules, where the 8th pick has a 6% chance of getting the top 4 pick, or the number 1 pick, should I say, look what happened here. So let's go to 2020. The Charlotte Hornets go into the lottery as 8th. they move up all the way to third, and they selected LaMelo Ball. So again, that's a notable pick there, that the Hornets jumped up 5 spots to get Ball. Then in 2019, the first time they went to these new lottery results, the Memphis Grizzlies go from 8th, jump all the way up to 2nd, and are able to get Ja Morant. So again, if you're the Spurs, obviously you're hoping that if you end up going 8th in the lottery order, that you have some of that really good luck, like the Hornets and Grizzlies did back then, and end up getting a top 3, top 4 pick. Whereas mathematically, the odds basically say you have a 67% chance based on these last 4 years that you're going to end up either getting 8th or maybe 9th or 10th is where the odds are most likely going to end up. But again, if you have a good, you never know, because again, it is a lot about luck in the lottery. And so again, if maybe the Spurs get lucky here, even if they have to go in as 8th and end up moving into the top 3, because it's happened before, like I said, in the last 6 years for both the Hornets and the Grizzlies. Let's keep going. All right, for this next segment, what I want to do here is kind of look at an interesting quote that I heard from Chris Paul on the night that the Spurs played the Cavs on Friday, and it was kind of in the middle of his interview toward the end there. And basically, let me put it kind of some context about how it came about. So basically, Devin Vassell ended up having another good night on that night, like I mentioned earlier, with 24 points against the Cleveland Cavaliers. And Paul was basically asked about that, about how without Wemby and Fox, not on the team right now because they're obviously injured. Players like Vassell have really stepped up lately. And basically, I'm going to play the clip for you. So let's go and listen to Paul's full audio on his quote.
With Wemby out and Fox out, has this been a good stretch for Devin to kind of assert himself and be the lead scorer?
Yeah, it is. But what I'm hoping for, our team, this team going forward is. These games are all good and well, but this isn't sort of the real NBA. Seriously, you can do all you want to without, you still got to play the games, but it's a totally different game when you get Fox, when you get Vic, you know what I mean? And there's a different type of purpose that you play with also when you are a playoff team and you're trying to, fight and get ready for that, so that's probably what I hoped and looked for most going into this season, is to have our guys get a chance to play really meaningful games. And I know it's coming in the future for these guys. So, yeah, it's good and well when guys scoring and doing all that in these games. But, when Vic and Fox get out there, that's when you got to figure out how you going to get in where you fit in. Yeah.
Blake?
So again, I just found that interesting because it kind of ties into kind of what I've been talking about the last few weeks. And I feel like Paul really summed it up very well, basically what I've been presenting. So the last few weeks, if you've been listening to the Spotted Pod, that basically since, All-Star break, since post All-Star break, when we learned that Victor would be out for the rest of the season, I've been talking about how 3 players have really stepped up lately for the Spurs, Stephon Castle, Devin Vassell, and Keldon Johnson. And I have noted how definitely you have to give credit to Vassell and Keldon in the fact they're shooting the ball a lot better post All-Star break compared to before when Victor was healthy and available there on the team with them, and that's part of their numbers. And I've also noted how Castle's just had a bigger increase in usage, and he's really been driving a lot more and getting obviously attacking the glass now, getting some rebounds, obviously guarding different players. So obviously Castle I think has been more consistent, I would say, for the season than maybe Vassell and Keldon have. So I think more so this conversation is I'm talking about here about Vassell and Keldon. And again, that's where I go back to Paul's comments about, yes, it's good that they're playing really well right now when Victor and De'Aaron aren't there. And again, these obviously it looked like for a long time now that the playoffs were not part of the future anymore once Victor and De'Aaron were rolled out for the rest of the season. And so that's where I think that I feel like what Paul said kind of ties into what I had been talking about in the last few weeks is can Devin and Keldon replicate what they're doing right now. Maybe not the same exact stats because it's hard to put up, for Devin's case, 19 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists with Fox and Wemby out right now. And the same thing for Keldon. Well, his are a little bit closer, 12 points, 6 rebounds, 2 assists without Fox and Wemby since March 14th, basically. Can they, I think the big question is, can they still stay as impactful? But like Paul says, they're going to have a different role because now all of a sudden they need to learn how to fit in around, those two players, because De'Aaron and Victor are going to be running a lot of the offense, getting a lot of the usage there at very high rates, and how do Vassell and Keldon kind of fit around that. And then same thing kind of too for Castle too, whether he starts or he comes off the bench next season, how does he fit in as well? Because he's obviously had a very high usage now since both players were rolled out for the season. He's kind of been leading the team in that respect. So again, I just wanted to note that quote from Paul, because even though we know that Paul's a free agent, he may not come back to the Spurs. I just want to note that from it was just an interesting quote to listen to from his perspective, a guy who's been in the league for for multiple years, a future Hall of Famer, to kind of hear his perspective of hey, it's cool that you're putting up these numbers right now when basically the games the playoffs are out of the picture. You're still missing your two best players, but can you do this as well, or at least stay as impactful and as efficient whenever you have a smaller role, maybe, or when there's more at stake? Obviously, when Victor and De'Aaron are there's going to be, the Spurs are going to be aiming for the playoffs, basically. And so again, that was just a quote that I wanted to highlight from Chris Paul. I found it very interesting, and I just wanted to discuss it here. All right, so before I close this episode, let's do our final prediction, or my final prediction, should I say, for the last 4 games of the Spurs' 2024-25 regular season. Let's go to Tuesday. The Spurs are on the road at Los Angeles against the Clippers. The Clippers are a very good team. They are 5th in the West. They are 8-2 in their last 10. They are trying to secure a playoff position and not end up in the play-in tournament. So I think they're going to go all out and try to win this game, obviously. And so I think that the Spurs lose this game. Then on Wednesday, it doesn't get any easier. The Spurs go to play the Golden State Warriors on the road. The Warriors just beat the Spurs in a blowout recently, and the Warriors are 6th in the West. They are 7-3 in the last 10 games, and very similar to the Clippers, the Warriors are focused on not getting in the play-in tournament. They want to secure a top 6 playoff seed, and so they will again be ready to go and wanting to win this game early and just take care of business. And so again, I think that the Warriors are going to end up winning this game as well. Then on Friday, it gets a little interesting. So on Friday, the Spurs are still on the road. Their final road game of the season. They're going to travel to Phoenix to play the Suns. The Suns are 11th out West. They are 4-6 in their last 10 games. And basically, if the Suns are, if the plan is still an option for the Suns by Friday, because they are 3.5 games behind the Mavs for 10th right now. If the playoff play-in hopes are still alive for Phoenix going into Friday's game, I'm going to give the win to Phoenix. But if it basically looks like the Phoenix has no chance of getting in anymore by the time Friday gets here, I'll go ahead and say maybe the Spurs win, because the Suns maybe rest some of their veteran players. So again, right now, because I don't know the situation, I'll go ahead and go with Phoenix and say a loss for the Spurs. And then on Sunday, like I mentioned earlier, the Spurs play the Toronto Raptors for their final game of the regular season, their final home game of the season as well. The Raptors are 11th in the East. They have as well. They have already been eliminated from the Eastern Conference playoff picture, so they're not really trying to get into play-in. They're also trying to make sure that the Spurs don't take that 7th spot from them in the lottery. And so the Raptors are 5-5 in the last 10. I'm going to go in and say that the Spurs win this one. I think that the Raptors will probably rest a lot of their veteran players. And so, yeah, I think that the Spurs end up taking that one. So again, I'm going to go ahead and say 1-3 is my final prediction of the last week of the season. But if Phoenix ends up resting their vets, then the Spurs could end up going 2-2. But again, we'll kind of see what happens here as the Spurs close out the 2024-25 regular season.